Hello, sports fans. Jim Coyle with Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Thank you for stopping by our YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe and notifications toggle so you never miss a thing. All of our content up here every day. Looking forward to it. Thank you, and we'll see you on the radio.
Brought to you by the Hard Truth Distilling Company in Brown County, Indiana.
So for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world.
Time! 3 on the way. Oh! It went in! It went in! And Indiana wins the ball game! Know your role and shut your mouth, you jabroni! Float game for the win! Ayler's gone. Goodbye, touchdown, Indy! Woo! America! They got a football team now!
Pretty simple. I win. Google me.
You know that I'm the cream of the crop.
Oh. Now, from the Hard Truth Studios, here's Jim Coyle.
Welcome back to the Hard Truth Distilling Company studios on this Friday, and welcome in Zach Osterman, the IU insider and beat writer for the Indy Star. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, how we doing?
Oh, just another busy week. A few things going on here and there, but it's all good. We've got a lot of basketball this weekend, a ton of basketball, actually, with the high school finals up in Indianapolis, the regional final at Lucas Oil. But that's how it should be every year in Indiana, and the weather's going to be great, so not much to complain about there. Indiana, Darian DeVries is a busy man right now, as you know, still putting together a staff. And I was just talking to Todd Leary a little bit ago, and how hard is it right now without having his staff in place? I know he has guys that are coming with him probably, but he doesn't have it in place, and he's got to navigate all of these transfer portal players and all of that. How is he navigating that without having his guys in place?
Yeah, I mean, listen, he does have some in place. And the HR process is in Indiana kind of takes some time. But I am confident there are at least 2 or 3 staffers with him organizing some things, laying things out. No, I mean it's not easy, but listen, this is just what you get when you make a coaching change. Everyone hates this calendar. I get that, but it's not something anyone can avoid. It's not something Indiana did to itself. Everyone is going through the same thing. I mean, we could have the same conversation about teams that are in the NCAA tournament. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Alabama's got one assistant that it's basically just completely dedicated to the transfer portal, despite the fact that it's still playing. I mean, I think on game day, everybody's in the game, but in terms of prep during the week between the round of 32 and the Sweet 16, I think Alabama took 2 assistants and said, you get us ready for the games, and took 1 assistant and said, you've got to start building us toward the portal because we got to go. There's the game, the season is still going on for these teams, and yet at the same time, they don't they have to be thinking for next year. I thought it was interesting that Matt Painter said when he's got guys that maybe can get one more year, he sits them down in the fall, and he says, I don't need an answer right now, but I need an answer in the next couple of weeks about whether or not you think you might want to take that next year. And he was talking, I think, about Mason Gillis and I think Ethan Morton specifically. But his point was, you got to plan for it in the fall so that it's not something that's popping up and grabbing you in the spring. So if you're Darian DeVries, yes, on the one hand, there's a lot going on. You got to fence a lot of stuff, in a short space of time without a full staff. On the other hand, you do have the advantage that some of your direct competitors don't, which is at very least, it's all you have to worry about. You're not traveling, you're not practicing, you're not prepping, whatever. You can only be focused on staffing and recruitment right now and nothing else. So, I mean, it's just, listen, this is the world everybody lives in. You just kind of got to find a way to make it work.
Yeah, and the one good thing I guess he doesn't have to worry about is losing players, because you're kind of starting at, I don't want to say ground zero, but not too far from that, with one recruit coming in and just possibly one player back. Bryson Tucker not heading the portal yet. That is probably a sign. I don't want to predict that he won't, but you would think that by now the conversations have been had between himself and Darian DeVries, and having him not entered the portal yet kind of pushes me in the direction of thinking that, just like Miles Rice and Kanan Carlisle hitting it after I believe they probably had those conversations, is telling.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I don't want to speak for anybody else. I haven't talked to Bryson Tucker or his family. I've been kind of more focused on covering the NCAA tournament the last few days. But, the longer a player goes not in the portal, the more you wonder, actually, are they sticking around? Is there mutual interest in kind of being retained from last season to this season? And, I don't know. I've talked to people about DeVries's sort of style. I haven't had as much time to kind of dig in to his I haven't had as much time to kind of dig into like film yet that of kind of some of his games, but my impression has always been that he's, he plays a little smaller than what Indiana has done in recent years, not certainly not two bigs, not a lot of post-up actions, a lot more sort of, I think motion-based concepts, a lot less, come down, set the offense, go to the big, and then let everything rotate around that. But a little bit more of just kind of, like I said, just motion concepts where everybody's constantly kind of in the action together. So maybe there is an appeal in keeping a, kind of a wing player like Tucker, who clearly has some very real potential. Maybe there is interest in keeping him around, but again, I recruiting, especially portal recruiting at this time of year, feels like one of those just never say never kind of deals.
Yeah, and Indiana fans, I know that they're anxious. They want to see who this team is going to be, but it's not going to just happen that quickly. You mentioned a lot of things that you have to go through. Coach DeVries is. He has to vet these guys in his own way as well. I'm not saying like potential employees get vetted, but there has to be some research done quickly, but done on these guys to make sure that not only are they the right fit, but they fit in every way on and off the court.
No, of course. I mean, and that's, we got a chance to sit down with DeVries this week, and I also got a chance to talk to his AD at Drake. The athletic director who hired him at Drake, Brian Harden, and something DeVries talked about at his hiring press conference. He talked about when we were sitting down, and I asked Brian about it too. I've actually known Brian for a lot of years because he used to be the Notre Dame football SID. I think that the phrase he uses is the front end, and what he means is, if you compromise, if you skip steps, if you cut corners at all at the front end, there's a decent chance that at some point that's going to create greater complications for you. And Brian Harden, again, his AD at Drake, made the point that, he had multiple years at Drake where he had an injury. One year his best player tore his ACL. Another year, I think there was a shoulder injury. And obviously last year, of course, at West Virginia with his son. And Brian's point was, it's because DeVries does such a good job, planning and building a roster, kind of doing due diligence on kids before he brings them in, whether they're high school recruits or transfers. It is so sort of like, I guess, imperative, and of course it is for everyone, but one of the things everyone who's worked with or around Darian DeVries has told me is one of his greatest skills is getting it right at the beginning. Getting it right with player evaluations, getting it right with character evaluations, building teams that structure well and sort of cohese well together. That's not a word, but you know what I'm saying. And then what that allows him to do is when the problems arise later in the season because someone's hurt or something's not working or whatever, there are a lot more solutions because he's built this really strong foundation. Brian Harden told me a story about, and he didn't name the player, and I understand why, but a player reached out to Drake with interest coming out of the portal, one of the years DeVries was head coach there. And Drake kind of politely passed, and the kid landed at a Big Ten school. And Brian said just like his curiosity got the better of him, and he was just like, hey, do you think, could this guy have played here? I mean, he's at a Big Ten school. And DeVries said, yeah, he could have, but when something went wrong, he would have kind of turned for himself. He would have become a problem because he would have just worried about himself. And that was kind of the point that Brian was making, is when DeVries talks about all that work at the front end being the foundation for everything, and the most, he's kind of talked about it almost like it's the most important part of his job. That's the kind of thing he's talking about. And so, time will tell what it looks like on the back end. If we're going to kind of continue that metaphor, time will tell what it looks like on the back end, in terms of, what the roster looks like, how it's constructed, who your key players are, et cetera. But right here, right now, this is what everyone who knows him says is really DeVries' sweet spot, is having a great feel for being able to process, being able to research kids, process information quickly, build a strong profile of a guy and say either A, he's going to fit us in what I'm trying to do, or B, he's not, and we're going to go somewhere else.
Well, you can definitely look at, of course, what he did at Drake, but moving on to West Virginia, who was finished last in the Big 12 conference and was picked to finish last again. And that's not what was happening with them. They, in essence, made the tournament, got screwed out of it. But so he'd already made a great turnaround at a place where, not that they hadn't had some basketball tradition, obviously they have, but not great. And it hadn't been great, obviously, before he took over. So I don't think that Indiana fans are going to be remiss in expecting a good start here. And I think that that's going to be the case. But I think more importantly, it's going to be, and me and Todd talked about this, more culture. They're going to see at least some culture, and it's going to be a DeVries stamp culture mixed with Indiana. But you have to have a culture. It doesn't have to be something specific, but there has to be something to keep you consistent, to keep your teams consistent. And so I think that is something Indiana fans are going to get to see beginning next season.
And he's been around, coaches that obviously he's done it himself. He did it at Drake. And, what's funny about West Virginia is, you get the sense from just the anger out of Morgantown when he left that they thought he was a really good coach and that they didn't want him to leave. But what's remarkable to me is that's the first time in his career that he's really jumped, because he was at Creighton for so long. And in fact, Dana Altman tried to bring him to Oregon, and he decided instead, especially because of his family, and they were comfortable in Omaha and they were near other, their extended family and stuff. He decided to stay at Creighton with Greg McDermott instead. And, he said there were a couple times when he turned down jobs that Dana Altman was like, you have got to take this job. But he was very patient. And on the other hand, he applied for the Drake job 3 times and didn't get it until, sort of the third time's the charm kind of thing. And then he was at Drake for 6 very successful seasons, when you would imagine there were probably some opportunities to move on then as well. So when you talk about culture, like, listen, everybody wants culture, right? Everybody wants, players that work hard and mesh well and represent the program well in the community and do well in the classroom. Like nobody's out there like, I hope I have a roster full of disrespectful miscreants who are constantly vandalizing, local furniture stores. Nobody's looking for that. But what I think, again, when you talk to people about DeVries and his ability to identify players that fit him and players that fit what he tries to do, I think it's interesting too how deliberate and how selective he has been with his own career in terms of when he's when he's decided that is what I want, and that's something I think I can do well. And when he said, no, I'm here, this is where I need to be right now, and I'm going to be patient. I'm not going to rush it. I'm not going to force anything. So I just think I think there's an extent to which that culture kind of starts at the top with him. And I think, we'll see if it works out in Indiana. I mean, I've covered far too many, failed head coaches here to start making bold predictions about this will work or this can't miss or whatever. But what I will say is, when I talk to people, when I observe him, when I research his career, when I talk to people who know him, it just seems like one of his greatest strengths is understanding what his teams need, what he needs in a player, how he connects to a player, etc. And all that stuff, winds up kind of boiling down to your culture.
Without question. And something somebody asked earlier is, why hadn't Tucker DeVries committed yet? And I just said that maybe DeVries would like for his first commitment to be someone other than his son. But there's no reason. I don't think there's a reason. I don't think that there's any doubt that he's going to play for Indiana next year if healthy. But I don't know why he wouldn't do that. Is NIL stuff that you got to go through?
Well, let me say the most I can on this, based on what I know and in what I'm comfortable kind of reporting or saying out loud or whatever. Just because someone hasn't announced it doesn't mean they're not in the program. Just because it hasn't been announced doesn't mean that the paperwork isn't processed. Doesn't mean that, listen, that there was a time when we didn't announce this stuff on social media, right? There was a time where the player just showed up, he took his physical, he registered for his classes, he did all the things he needed to do. Either he or if it was necessary, a parent signed off on all his forms, and that was it. He was done. Nobody needed to post an edit that was, or a video that was like, I'm here now. Just because nothing has been formally announced does not mean nothing has happened. That is what I would say. And
yeah, especially when it comes to staffers, that takes even longer to come through. And last thing, what the heck was I going to ask? What do you think the chances are? Which I think they're good, for Luke Goody getting a waiver for another season.
So this is where I have to put on my put on my lawyer hat, and I'm always hesitant to do that because I'm certainly not a lawyer. On its face, Goody really doesn't have a case because the rule says, and I've never been fully clear how the NCAA treats postseason games when it counts, because the rule is you have to have played in fewer than 30% of your team's games. In football, it's always 3 games. If you play more than 3 games, other than the 4-game redshirt rule that has been allowed in football, and I don't really know why we aren't doing that in basketball, but that's a separate conversation. Other than that, if let's say you've already used your redshirt in football, if you play more than 3 games, if you play 4 games, that's 33% of your 33% of your season. You can't get the year back via a medical waiver. In basketball, it's 9 or 10. Obviously, it depends a little bit on how many games you play, and this is where I think the NCAA doesn't consider, when it's calculating the 30% threshold, postseason games, because the idea is not everybody plays the same number of postseason games. A player who plays for a team that goes to the Final Four, in theory, they have a better shot at a medical hardship waiver than a player who plays for a team that doesn't go to the NCAA tournament because they play a different number of games. So the rule says if you play those games in the second half of the season, any of them, you can't have the year back. I think that's probably intensified by the fact that he played in the postseason. On the other hand, if we don't count postseason games, he only played in something like 28% of his team's games because he appeared in 8 of 31 regular season games. What I know Goody is arguing sort of publicly is he should not be penalized for wanting to come back and help his team. He shouldn't be penalized for trying to compete. He could have shut it down and said, no, I want to save this year. I don't want to burn a year of eligibility, but he didn't do it. He came back to help his team. They went to the NCAA tournament, yada, yada, yada. What I think will probably be more compelling to argue in terms of, that's maybe a compelling argument in the court of public opinion in a hearing with the NCAA, or if Goody was willing to take, if it eventually required this and Goody was willing to take it to court, what I think would be a more compelling argument is the NCAA has just kind of arbitrarily decided that games in the first half of the season count different from games in the second half of the season. There shouldn't, what's the reason for that? I'm sure the NCAA had one when it wrote the rule, but the problem now is when we used to have these conversations about eligibility, they were all based on the assumption that we all had to accept the NCAA's definition of amateurism. And therefore, any question of your eligibility was related to your status as an amateur athlete. Now, we don't necessarily at the legal level have to accept that definition of amateurism so absolutely anymore. And Goody, I think, can reasonably say, I would be making six figures in NIL plus revenue sharing next year if I got this year back. The only reason I can't have this year back is because you sort of arbitrarily decided that these games count different to these games. That doesn't make any sense. I shouldn't be penalized for trying to help my team when if I'd played all these games in November, no one would have any problem with what I'm asking for now. And you are, by denying me this fifth year, you are denying me essentially, right to fair earning. And Goody can say, without much trouble, this is how much money I'm not going to be allowed to make because of your eligibility rule. And if you've already got, players like athletes like Diego Pavia, frankly, arguing much more dramatic sort of exceptions to eligibility rules, like things as sort of fundamental as junior college years shouldn't count as NCAA years, which Pavia's case is a little more complicated than that, but just to kind of, I'm already on a ramble, so I'm trying to streamline it for you. Goody can say, basically, all I'm asking you to do is just consider that basketball games are basketball games no matter when in the season they're played, and that this rule was probably already kind of arbitrary and unfair. And again, I think if he's willing to push it this far, Goody is going to have a compelling argument to say this is an antitrust violation on the grounds that I have the right to earn this wage. I did it last year. Here are all these examples of other players doing it. And you're preventing me from doing that via an arbitrary rule based on what? And that's where I think Goody, it may be one where Goody has to take it a little ways. Now, maybe the NCAA, maybe he gets in front of the NCAA, rattles the saber a little bit, and the NCAA says, you know what? There's fights worth fighting and there's fights worth letting go. This isn't a fight worth fighting. If they deny him and Goody is willing to take it further, I think he's got a case, but that may end in a courtroom somewhere, or at least in depositions and attorney fees, and billable hours as ever are undefeated.
Where the NCAA does not historically have a good record. So
no, certainly not. And certainly not in cases where the athlete is arguing the NCAA is obstructing the athlete's right to earning a fair wage. And Goody can justifiably say, if I don't get this year back, then I'm leaving, I don't know what Luke Goody's NIL situation was last year, but I think we can all guess that it was probably in six figures. I'm leaving that on the table. So, yeah.
Sounds great. Zach Osterman, the IU Insider for the Indy Star. Make sure you're a subscriber. Keep local papers alive. Appreciate you, my friend. Enjoy your weekend.
Absolutely. You too, Jim. We'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Zach Osterman again from the Indy Star. Hello, sports fans. Jim Coyle with Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Thank you for stopping by our YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe and notifications toggle so you never miss a thing. All of our content up here every day. Looking forward to it. Thank you, and we'll see you on the radio.